afternoon, everybody. Welcome to class today. Thank you for joining me. Whether you're watching live or you're watching the recording. I appreciate you watching. Thanks for coming to class today. So today we're going to do a relatively brief class here about interaction design. Majority of you, I think maybe all of you, are also in the Web 215 class, where we talk a lot about the way that we do the interaction design and the way that we do the animations for interaction. And so that is definitely a part of interaction. But when we talk about interaction from a theory perspective and from a design perspective, we're really talking about, how we guide user interactions and, why we create interactions in such a way. Right. So one of the big things that I kind of want to do in our discussion today is just to kind of point out some theory behind why we make some of the decisions the way that we make the decisions. And there is content in your module there that'll support you in doing some basic interaction stuff as well. So what exactly is interaction design? We have a little acronym for interaction design, IXD. But the Interaction Design Association, which seems like they would be the authority on interaction design, they define interaction design as such, right? They say interaction design defines the structure and behavior of interactive systems. Interaction designers strive to create meaningful relationships between people and the products and services that they use, from computers to mobile devices to appliances and beyond. So our practices are evolving with the world. And so, in that sort of statement there, I think we can see or relate that a lot to the book that we've been reading throughout the semester, the Don Norman Design of Everyday Things book, right? Like a lot of the stuff that Mr. Norman talks about in that book is appliance design or some sort of other, industrial design system type of thing related that's not specifically a website or like mobile application or something of that nature. Right? But throughout the time that we've been studying this, like one of the things that we've done is we've worked on like making the relationships and making the touch points between how we use, say, an appliance and how we use a website. And it really comes back to this right here, right? It comes back to the idea of interaction. Whether it is a human-computer interaction or a human interface interaction, whatever you're interacting with, there are some standard theories and some standard sets of principles that govern these things, right? So when does interaction design start? When do we start worrying about designing interactions? Well, we can think about our process for interaction design in terms of the first designed interaction, right? So when that thought crosses your mind of how are users going to interact with this product, whether it is, how are they going to get to the website, or how are they going to find the information they need? What are they going to do when they get here? Whatever that first interaction you can kind of come up with, that's when we start thinking about interaction design. Right? And so that's really early on in the process, right? Like when we talk about solving our problems with websites and the problems that we can solve, we're typically talking about something that is related to some sort of interaction. Right? So if we want to provide information, how do we want to provide that information? How do we want users to be able to get to that information? Are we just going to put it all on the homepage and they need to scroll? Right, that's one thing. Or are we going to put it on sub-pages where they need to click? That's another thing, right? Both of those are examples of interactions. And the users using our websites and their interactions that you would come up with early on. Right, so more in general, interaction design began the first day. The first screen was designed to hold more than static copy. right? So everything from a button to a link to a form field is part of interaction design. And so over the past several decades, there have been a number of books on this subject that explain all the different facets of interaction design and explore the myriad ways it intersects and overlaps with experience design. And so we benefit from the knowledge of a lot of other people that have sort of come together with us to get to this point. Right, and so when we look at interaction design and how it sort of fits in with the overarching user experience design, we see it touches a lot of different stuff when it comes to the overall design of our website. Right, we can see there are some things that user interaction design doesn't touch. Specifically, well, really the only thing specifically being the content, being the text and the video. Right, and even to a lesser extent video, because if you're having the user play the video, then you're introducing an interaction. And so, will the video autoplay or will the user play the video? So even that is sort of a gray area, and I think maybe it just didn't fit into this chart quite well. Right, but we can see in this wild Venn diagram here how many things interaction design touches, and we see it's interacting with the sound design, interacting with HCI or human computer interaction, almost completely within user experience design. Right, and other aspects of user experience design like the visual design, the human factors behind it, right, that human-centered design that we've talked about in the past, general industrial design, the architecture of your websites or your products or whatever you're dealing with. And we can see, and it could just be limitations of this Venn diagram, because I don't really know what this section would be, that it is outside of user experience design and outside of everything else, but it's still interaction design. Right? Because if you're doing a user experience design, interaction is or should be wholly consumed within user experience design. So this could just be a bit of a I didn't make this chart, right? Just for full disclosure, I got this chart from somewhere because I thought I thought it represented things very well. But I think it might just be that that's where they kind of had to put the circle in order to get everything else to connect properly, right? Because otherwise you might have HCI and sound design overlapping, which, I mean, to a degree, there might be a little bit of overlap that should happen there. For example, if I prompt an interaction based on a sound, but in general, those two don't meet. Right, so there could be some slight deficiencies in the chart here, but overall, I think, one of the big things to notice out of this chart is just how many different areas and how many different parts of our design and the things that we do intersect with this concept of interaction design. So when we think about the interaction design process, there are three key things there. One is user focus, right? This goes back to the concept of human-centered design that we've been talking about the entire semester. So we're focused on the user and how the user in particular interacts with our website. Specific usability criteria, right? So what exactly makes this website usable? So are there clear affordances and signifiers, for example? Is your accessibility good? Right? Do you have good accessibility on your website? What's the criteria that you're using to judge a website as usable, because that can vary from person to person, and that can be an issue. And then finally, iteration. Right? Every design process basically has iteration built into it. Right? We say that website design is a living process to a degree, right? Like nothing ever really is finalized as you see an interaction design in action and users are using your site. That interaction is going to evolve. All right, and it's going to change and it's going to be a little different, and you might need to change things, or the need for something might change, and so you might need to adapt the way you're allowing your users to interact. So user focus, a process cannot guarantee that a development will involve users. It can encourage focus on such issues and provide opportunities for evaluation and user feedback. So what I mean by that is that you don't necessarily have the opportunity to be able to get potential or current users in the process, in the design process, right? But they still need to be considered. And if you can find opportunities to bring users in and do some of the things that we've talked about before, like A/B testing or focus grouping and surveying and things like that, then you should be doing that if at all possible. To expand on specific usability criteria, we're talking about setting goals. What do we want to see happen in order for this website to be usable? What are our goals? Clearly document those goals. And then work to achieve those goals. And typically those goals are going to be, we might want to include some general goals in there, right? Like we might want to say, no edge cases. Our website should be accessible to all users. So in order to meet the bare minimum of usability, we need to make sure our website is accessible. And so that is a specific usability criteria. Another one might be, okay, we want to be able for our users to get to the information they need to get within 2 clicks. Right? Or in 1 click, or in as few clicks as possible. Right? And so when you're starting to create specific goals like that, then when you design, you're designing toward those ends. Right? So you understand your usability criteria, and you can say something like the example of, I want users to be able to get to the information that they need within 2 clicks. And so as you're designing, you make sure that no interaction that a user would need to conduct would take more than 2 clicks to get to. Right? So this helps you choose between alternative designs and choose between different processes and really check on your progress to see if you're meeting your goals, right? Because if you have something where it's sort of hitting the wall against your specific usability criteria, then you might want to rethink the way that you're designing things or rethink the way that you're doing things. And if one design meets the specific usability criteria and another design might look a little better or might help meet another need a little bit better, but doesn't get you to that specific usability criteria, then you might need to think about a compromise, or you might just go with the other design because usability would then be the more important thing. And iteration allows designs to be refined based on feedback, right? So you create a website, you put it out there in the world, people use it, right? There are instances where we sort of see this thing happen, right? Where interaction design creates feedback, and then we use that feedback to make changes and create a new interaction. And really, I saw this a lot when I was and they actually talked about doing this sort of thing there. When I was on the campus of Utah State University. right? And they were designing the layout for the different walkways to get to the different buildings across campus. And one of the things that they noticed was at some of the intersections of the walkways, and this is a very common interaction thing that happens. It's why is the name of it eluding me? It's the name of it's eluding me, but that's fine. We can just describe what's happening. But one of the things that would happen is that when somebody would get to an intersection and they needed to turn, they wouldn't follow the paved path. They would cut the corner, right? Because if they cut the corner, it was quicker for them to make the turn, right? And so you'd see like a worn-in groove in the grass where people were cutting the corner. And there is two ways we can innovate on our design there. And one would be more about meeting our goals. And the other would just be about... So one would be more about meeting our human-centered goals, and the other would be more about meeting our selfish goals. Right? So if we were to iterate on that sort of process. Right? Because if you see this groove getting worn into the grass where people are cutting corners, you can make one of two decisions, and I've seen both decisions done. The first thing you can do is you can create a little garden. You can get pavers and you can get mulch, and there in that corner you can build a little pretty garden. Right? And what that's going to do is that's going to force people to go around and take the path. Right? So you're forcing an interaction there, and that's more of a selfish goal. Right? Because, maybe you want a beautiful campus, and that's, one of your, that's your selfish goal. And so, being able to add flowers and not have a worn-in groove in the grass makes your campus look better. But the other way that you can iterate on that is to do what they did at Utah State University, that the thing that a lot of other places do is you take and you pave up to the area where they, where that worn-in patch is. Right? Because that's the path that your user is taking. That's the interaction that your user is doing with this system. Is they're cutting that corner and they're cutting it right at that specific spot. And they're cutting it right at that specific spot because that's where the grass is worn in. So you could choose to try to force users to follow your way, or you could iterate with a human-centered iteration and pave the path that your users walk. Right? And so that's what we're talking about here, really, when we're talking about iteration and making choices based on our goals. And ensuring that we are, being human-centered and user-focused as we're doing these different things. So we have some conceptual models that are based on activities, and these are things that we kind of, we can kind of implement into a website that sort of mimics things we do in real life, right? Like giving instructions. So for giving instructions, these are our affordances and our signifiers. Conversing, interacting back and forth, manipulating and navigating is when we're acting on objects and interacting with virtual objects. And then exploring and browsing, which is just finding out and learning things, which is an interesting concept on its own, that one of the conceptual models of interaction design is just kind of letting your user get lost and browse. Right? But we see it in stores. right? And so there are use cases where we want to kind of encourage people to get lost and browse. Well, we'll kind of go over that here in just a second. Right, so when we're talking about giving instructions, we're talking about instructions both ways, right? We're talking about, yes, of course, us giving instructions to the user on what, the user should interact with, affordances and signifiers. But we also have instructions where users can tell the system what to do. For example, clicking the print button or clicking save to save a file. And so we see this a lot in complex systems, right? Like the thing that is mentioned here that half of you won't understand is VCRs, right? Like how many buttons are on the front of a VCR that you have to press. There's play and there's pause, and there's these instructions that you're giving to the machine. You're telling the machine to play, you're telling the machine to pause, you're telling the machine to record, etc. But like a word processor like Word would probably be a better modern example, or a vending machine. Right? You have instructions for how you do it, but also you're giving that machine instructions for what that machine should do. For example, you want it to go to, A5 and get a Coca-Cola or whatever, right? And so the main benefit of having this sort of interaction is that it's quick and efficient, right? If you tell them to press this button to get this result, then they press that button and they get the result, and it's easy. Another thing is conversing, right? So this is the idea of, an underlying model of having a conversation with another human. Right, and I have Clippy here as my example. But it's even more so when you think about AI and virtual agents. And even more than that, things like Siri and Amazon Alexa. Right, so Clippy was kind of the great grandfather to things like Siri and Alexa and the generative AI virtual agents that we have today. And that's sort of the thing that we're discussing here, is we're able to have a natural language sort of back and forth conversation with something that is virtual. And so like one of the examples here that is being given is help system, right? And one of the things that we're doing here at the college is we're looking at getting a brand new AI-based live chat on the website, right? So that when people come to the website, they can talk to a virtual agent and get the information that they need. And so we typically see this as being some sort of fallback to where, if what we saw on the previous screen there, this idea of giving instructions doesn't work, so the user's not able to give the right instructions to a website to be able to do the process that they need to do, then they fall back to some sort of virtual agent, some sort of, live help, or a search box, for example. Could be an example of a conversation, because what you're saying to the search box is, I would like to look for this, and they're saying, okay, here are some examples of that. And we see, search engines even is one of the examples that's given here. So we typically see this as a fallback if the giving instructions fail. Manipulating and navigating involves dragging, selecting objects, actually physically moving things around on a website. And so we don't see this as much, but we do see it some. You know, it is something that really can help, you know, users visualize a process and complete a process easily enough, right? So that is something that we like to do. And so I think that's probably where I want to stop here. Normally I get into some animation stuff here as well, but since the majority of you, or I think probably all of you, are also in the Web 115 where we've already covered a lot of that, or the Web 215, I should say, where we've already covered a lot of that. We don't need to rehash it. So we'll let that be it here for today. That's all that I have for you. We'll hold just for a moment here, just in case anybody watching has any questions. But I think, you know, just based on what we did today, it should be pretty clear. All right. I think we'll go ahead and wrap things up here. Thank you all for watching today, and we will see you next time.